And the next speaker who will be joining us on stage, we have also asked to rejoin us. She was here before with us in 2011, and we're very, very happy that this year Mitchell Baker, the chairperson and founder of the Mozilla Project, has been able to join us at Republica again. So in the next half hour, Mitchell will be talking to us about the importance of open in the internet and how to build a web that we can trust. Please give a warm welcome to Mitchell Baker.
Well, it is great to be back, and it's great to see that this event is growing and is making its place in the world, because I think it's unique among the events that I've been to. So it's really exciting to be back. And this time, I want to talk, as you can see, about building trust, or building a web that we can trust, and how to build a web that's more trustworthy. Because this conference makes it clear that the internet and the network is touching all aspects of life. Whatever you can imagine, the network is in the middle of it somewhere, and more is coming. Sensors are cheap, right? So data, we're just at the very beginning of an explosion of data. Data about us, data made by us, data collected by others. And so this question of, are we living in a system that we trust? Are we living in the middle of a network system that we don't understand, can't follow, and certainly can't control? And the good news is that the web, at least, and the internet were founded on technologies and principles that make trust possible, and that we do have the opportunity today to continue to build on that and to build a web that has more trust in it. I'm not suggesting that all of the network that we live in will be trustworthy. That would be too much. There certainly will always be people and organizations that are interested in controlling and manipulating and oppressing, and who live in misogyny and with a set of values that really don't reflect well on humanity. So I'm not trying to fix that, not trying to paint a picture that's perfect or a picture of too much optimism or idealism, but this is the time, and we do have the opportunity to build a layer of the network which is more trustworthy than it would otherwise be, and with some luck and a bunch of work and some thinking about it, to actually build a layer of the network that we can trust. And so we've been trying to do that at Mozilla. Certainly I've been trying to lead in that direction for quite a long time. We're known for Firefox and product and so on. But the reason we build product is to build these traits that lead to trust sort of into the network. And so over time, we've come to identify a series of traits that put together, you start to build a more trustworthy system. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about those, talk a little bit about some of the things that we've learned in trying to implement them, and then invite, I hope, a conversation and some ongoing interaction, either today and certainly in the future, with anyone else who's actually intentionally out trying to build trustworthy systems. So as we've been working on this and thinking about it over the years, one of the key traits has always been openness. And that starts, of course, with transparency and data. Like, how can you trust a system if you can't possibly understand it? Now, most of the time, many of us don't want to spend the time and attention to understand the details of a system. And that's a fine thing. But some number of us, at some point in time, may want to invest the time and energy to understand how a system works. And when you want to do that, that turns out to be a key trait of trustworthiness. If, for example, I look up one day and say, I'd like to understand what my phone is actually doing. I'd like to understand what messages it's sending out and what data it's sending where. And I'd like to understand when an app is sucking all my contacts out into its own world and then doing whatever it wants with them, as used to be standard practice. So maybe someday, something will happen, and one of us will look up and say, I really want to understand that. So can you do it? And if you can't do that, it's pretty hard to trust a system in that case. So openness and transparency of the source data, of the documentation, and as deep as you can get, has turned out to be one of the key traits, not just for being effective in action, but for building a system that's trustworthy. Another key trait we found is choice. Right? Obviously, if you have a choice in systems, you can evaluate which one meets your needs best, which one is tuned towards the things you care about. You know, maybe you really care about a feature set, and you really want, you know, whatever it is, fast or reliable. So you can find a system that's tuned that way. Maybe you really care about privacy. Find a system that's tuned that way. So choice has turned out to be really important in finding a system that feels trustworthy. Today, of course, choice is not always easy because of the network effects. And increasingly, we see one or two players having huge elements of network life where there really isn't much choice. Or if there's a choice between one or two players, you know, they're kind of the same. They don't really offer a broad range of choices. And so we found that this is really important in trust, and we tried to bring choice, of course, into the browser space. And it's still important, but realistically, it's hard to see going forward how to create choice across the board. You know, we continue to work on it, but it's an area where the network effects are such, I think we have to look and say, what kind of choice as consumers and citizens are we likely to have? And a third element in a system that's trustworthy is how much can someone participate? You know, at first it's great just to get something. And at first it's really great to be able to consume. And the web is really wonderful at this because so much is free of charge. And so there's the luxury of consumption, where people give you things, and you're not consciously paying for them. You're certainly not paying in cash. And so you have free consumption. And that is a huge luxury. But it turns out that after you've consumed enough, right, and you look up and you say, wow, this doesn't work for me. It's not my language. It doesn't fit my values. I'd like to change it. It's broken. I can't make it work. At that point, the ability to participate becomes the next luxury. Because if you're a consumer, the only thing you can do is buy or not buy. And if there's nothing that's better for you, you're locked out of being able to influence or control your own experience. And so as we live in this networked world where so much information and experience and apps are free of charge, the ability to actually make a change that's important to you and to be able to participate in the creation of your experience becomes the next level of luxury. I put luxury in quotes there. And we have found over the years that more people want to get involved than anyone ever thought. So these are the key traits that we have found that we can apply across experiences in trying to build trust. Now, sometimes it sounds easy. Just be open, you know, let people participate. And sometimes it's easy, but more than anything, it requires a vision. Because it turns out that open systems are new in our cycle. They're not natural for a lot of people. And it takes some work to actually figure out what open means in a new setting and to have the vision that drives us forward. So for example, when we started working on Firefox, open was an odd idea. Open source was an odd idea. Free software was an odd idea. There was no open science. There was no open data. There was no open government. The idea of open and not having secrets was a really odd idea. And so the key aspect of building something different was actually to have the vision and to set back and say, wow, what would it be like? Do we believe that people can work together voluntarily? Do we believe that something other than maximizing your own wealth or revenue motivates people sometimes? Do we believe collaboration is possible? Do we believe people are able or willing to work together? And so it was that vision that open source and free software brought 15, 20 years ago, that was the beginning of the open movement. And so today, we think about open, and it exists in many different parts of society, open architecture, it's everywhere. And yet, that's an idea that took being different. And it took a commitment to engaging people, providing a framework where people could get involved, and providing enough participation and leadership for people to feel they trusted a system and to actually participate in it. So the Firefox era started out with some things being really easy and other things being really hard. Like, we really were a poster child for failure for a while because, building in a consumer product with open principles was known to be impossible. So some things are easy and some things are exciting, but not all of them. And so it really takes having the idea either that open matters or that trust matters and working to make your vision understandable to people and to make it real. And so here's an example of some of the things that we tried to think about to be trustworthy. And this one's from long ago. This one's from the Firefox 3 era. And this was the question of location. I think now, especially with mobile devices, we mostly share our location all the time. And in fact, we often share it without knowing it. But when we first put location into Firefox, we thought, if we're a brand about trust and we know that many people aren't yet comfortable with location, how do we help them? And so behind the scenes, we did a lot of work. This is the front, the user interface. But behind the scenes, the system used to be that if you went to a website and the website asked for your location, the website that you were on was broadcast. And so, behind the scenes, we went and did the negotiation and, used our market share to try and push the system to say, you know what? That request to say, where is this person? We don't have to send along all that extra information. We don't have to tell them who you are. We don't have to tell them what website we're visiting. We can really shrink down the information so that what's traveling in the system is exactly what you need and not a whole bunch of extra information about you. And so that turned out, we're able to make that the norm in the system. And so at the time, that was a really important point, because the idea that my location would be broadcast without me knowing or caring, and not just my location, but what website I was going on was being sent around the web, was a really important point to people. Now, today we look at it and we say, do I want to see that every time? Do I want to see it on my phone every time? The answer might be no. Maybe today we're so used to sending our location and not worrying if people know where our location is, we don't want to ask anymore. And maybe today the decision is, I value convenience more than I value privacy over where I am. And so the question of openness and trust and information and data flow is always in a mix of convenience and what's useful and what am I used to. And so this idea of building trust, it's not something you can do once, and you can't get to an answer for today and expect that it will be the answer going forward. It's a really ongoing process, and that's certainly true in product, since online life is changing so much. And I think it may be true in the policy realm as well. And it's one reason why we urge caution in a lot of policy making, is because things are changing so quickly. It's hard to know that a decision today will be the right trust decision for 2 years from now. And so this kind of, here's the goal, what do people need to trust today, and then having enough participation from your users or citizens or community to be able to adjust that over time turns out to be really important. Certainly it'd be easier if you could make a decision once and that was it, but it doesn't work that way. And today, we also have issues in discussion about how to be trustworthy and how to be open and have lots of choice and how to engage people and have as much participation in building our experiences as we want. And this is particularly true when we move into new areas. And one of the areas that's top of mind now is advertising and tracking and what's happening with those sets of data. And so being open sometimes is messy. And inviting participation is also messy. It's very hard to work on a product in the open with lots of participation and have a perfectly groomed appearance. And it's very difficult to work out compromises and test things in the open without, of course, everybody knowing what you're doing. Right? That's the whole point. And so as we try to work in the open, some parts of it are easy for us because we've been doing it for a long time, but some parts are still quite difficult. And so here I've got 3 examples related to advertising and tracking to describe. This first one is an image of what is actually a plugin for Firefox called Collusion. And what it does is as you browse, it visualizes who's tracking you. So it lets you watch the people who are watching you. And so if you're interested, you can find it as an add-on. What this first image is going to one site. Getting up in the morning and going, this is to the New York Times, which is at the center, and every one of those dots around it is a cookie that's now watching you. And so if you continue to browse with Collusion, you can see at each site you go to who's watching you, what advertising agencies are watching you, and you can see, let's say you've gone to 3 sites, what parts of the world now know that you've gone to these 3 sites. And you went to site 1 and they gave you a cookie and now you're being tracked around the web. So maybe you care, maybe you don't. But the results end up looking something like this. This is after 6 news sites. And every one of those dots is somebody who's now watching you. And those lines will show you which of those people who are watching you know how many sites you went to. And do they just know, oh, you were on the New York Times or you were on the Huffington Post, or do they know that you've traveled around where you've been? And of course, we also don't know what other information they're correlating that with. So we can show you currently in Collusion who's watching you at any site to help visualize what's going on. What we still don't have visualization tools for are like, what other information is that being joined with? We know today that the targeting gets more effective if you take something like this online and you correlate it with offline data. What did you buy? All the kinds of information about you that can be bought. And so that's happening more and more, where your online profile is being added to things that you do offline. And so that's a pretty good-sized picture of you. We can't yet visualize for you what all of that is, but we currently can visualize what happens online and who's watching you. And so this is something we've been working on for, I don't know, maybe 18 months. It was our first foray into online activities, and the first goal was to understand what's going on. And because it's open source, so you can get the source code if you want, you can get the raw data, you can look and see what's going on. So we're thinking that it's useful for this level of visualization, but by making it clear and making the code available and making the project available, there may be other ways to visualize data and what's going on that we haven't thought of that others might as well. The next thing that we did is to say, well, here's what's happening. What kind of choices are out there? And the advertising industry has a self-created opt-out mechanism where you would say, I don't really want to be tracked. And they've been working on it for a while, but at least in the United States, the government regulators were unsatisfied with that solution as being inadequate and hard to use. And so we created Do Not Track. And we created that in a standards-based way because that's how you get participation and choice. And that started out surprisingly well. And the goal of that is to move from visualization to expressing a choice. And so Do Not Track has made some progress. It's in the middle of a sort of industry-wide discussion about what makes sense. We've managed to get the other browsers to agree to adopt the same standards so it can be used across the industry. That took some work. And in particular, to get Google to join us there, they were the last ones, but we managed to get the whole browser industry so that advertising players can do this once, and we can express our interest in how much we're tracked or not. And something currently like 13% of people here in Germany do that. And there are billions of signals being sent now which say, I don't want to be tracked. The goal of these things is not necessarily to say tracking is bad, and certainly not to say personalization is bad, is to start to build an understanding and an idea of what's actually happening to us, and what as people and consumers do we care about. And there's data that shows, it's like 86% of us don't believe, we don't trust what websites say they do with our data. So that's not a great starting point. Right? If we don't trust a system, it's going to get more and more distorted as we become increasingly reliant on it. Imagine living in a system that you don't trust, but you absolutely cannot escape. And so our work on the tracking and advertising sense is trying to figure out and move towards a system where you can have personalized content and ads, but without the being followed around the web and without the collection of data that we know nothing about. And so our current, our most recent experiment in that setting has been looking at what would happen if we were to block third-party cookies. Right? And so that has a different kind of impact on the industry because now that's an action piece. That's a piece of trying to represent ourselves and represent individual users in online life. Now, that's a complex topic because a lot relies on third-party cookies. And we have done this in the open. And so this is back to what is messy and difficult about being open. Right? But it turns out that to understand something that crosses the web, the testing for it is really deep and wide. You need millions and millions of people to test something to know what actually happens. So does blocking third-party cookies break the web? Does it break an advertising model? You have to do a fair amount of testing to know that. And we do that testing in the open, and we invite participation from everyone. And so that's including the ad industry. Now, some of that has been vehement. And so that discussion of what about third-party cookies? What should we do about them? That discussion is ongoing. And it's certainly messy, and we get a lot of press about it. And there's it's not possible for us to say, oh, we're going to make a beautiful, clean, smooth statement about that as we do our experiments and our work in the open. And so one of the things as you think about building trust and what actual openness and participation means is often it's really messy. And you can't appear as precisely professional and as cleanly polished as you might want to if you're going to have a lot of these discussions in the open. It might be, well, yeah. So those were our experiences with Firefox, past, sort of, and present. Open has some really, really great traits. This, for example, this little text piece here, was the launching of Firefox OS. We looked up and we realized, of course, a browser is no longer enough. Right? In the new mobile environment, everything's a nicely integrated stack. And so we're working on an operating system for mobile devices. But the thing about Open, the great thing about Open is this is what launched it. It was very text-heavy posting to a Mozilla developers newsgroup. That's it. Right? But because it's an open news group and because people know it, it exploded after that. Like within 3 or 4 days, the whole initiative exploded, which is a little surprising because, it was really a message to developers about what we were thinking. But the advantage of that is that people found us. And people we never would have imagined out there found us. And they came to us and they said, let's work together. We're interested in this idea, and we're willing to work with you because you work in the open. And so we've learned once again that being in the open, being a little messy, like we had just gotten started when we put this up. There's a GitHub repository and a vision. But by being out in the open, people can find us and then push on ideas and figure out whether they trust us enough to keep working with us. So with Firefox OS, we're trying to bring those same traits of openness and participation into the mobile environment. We're trying to build web APIs into your phone. Like, just imagine if you took your phone out of your pocket and you could access any aspect of it just the way you would on a website. Turns out it's not that hard. Someone just has to do it. And in the mobile environment, no one had a vision, or at least in the market, with enough market presence to present a vision of something that was open and different. And so that's what we're trying to do. It's messy, because it's all new and there's new players and we don't actually have a map of where we're going. And so figuring out what open and trustworthy looks like in the mobile space is a very public endeavor, and you'll see us doing that. And so you'll see over time that it's not as polished, perhaps, as you might expect. But part of that is that we're figuring out a new path. I mean, we know we have the vision for what it should be, but how does that actually work in real time? But building trust is a really great thing. There's some parts of it that aren't easy, but it's really great. And you can see, this is a teaching initiative, like the excitement of people as they come to understand the web and that it is ours and we can take it apart and put it back together. As people build competence, that sense of, oh, this is why I would trust something, is because I'm competent in it. And that's something that we sometimes see less of in young people today than a decade ago. So we have an initiative to try and do that. And it turns out that sense of understanding and how you make something real and change something is a pretty fundamental driver of trust. Another thing that we're doing that's really in the fun category of what's open is WebRTC. And so this is real-time communications in the web. And what this means is that from the browser, in a web page, you can start peer-to-peer audio, video, and data sharing. You don't need a proprietary plugin. You don't need a website. You don't need anything special. All you need to do, like, have your browser open, and someone can call you. And you can talk, you can chat, you can see that person, you can share data. You can drag and drop a file on your browser, and it will show up on my browser. And I don't know, probably not time to do a demo right now, but JB over here, can you just wave your hand? If you actually want to see that afterwards, here's the guy. He can call you on your browser if you'd like. And so we find these things exciting because they're both open. People can see them. There's nothing proprietary. There's no integrated stack. They're standards-based. They'll work in any browser or rendering engine. They're distributed. You can build a site. You can share information. It's a peer-to-peer connection. You need a registry to find each other, but once you do that, it's peer-to-peer encrypted connection. It's not your data going to somebody else's server. Like, it's the kind of thing that allows us to trust what's going on. And we'll skip that for right now. So now is the time. Ton of stuff is happening. There's huge new business opportunities, new ideas. Governments are getting involved. The web, we've been through the first phase. We're now into the second phase of mobile devices and these integrated stacks. But now is the time for those of us who have some of the knowledge and the vision of what open and transparent and participatory and trustworthy look like to try and do something about it. And certainly at Mozilla, we're pretty much focused on that all the time, but we have the luxury, we're a nonprofit, so that's easy for us to do. That doesn't mean like that's a full-time commitment for everyone, but I am imagining that everyone in this room has a degree of competence about the web and what's possible, and that hopefully enough of us have a vision about making the network trustworthy that we continue to make progress on it. Thank you.
Yes, having a microphone helps. Thank you very much, Mitchell.